In the cold silence of space, on a forgotten moon orbiting a dying gas giant, the archaeologists uncovered a doorway. It wasn't carved by claw or shaped by plasma torch. It was impossibly smooth, perfect, precise. The lines didn't match any known alien architecture. No species in the galactic census used such geometries. The door was made of obsidian alloy, unweathered despite eons. When they finally breached it, the lights inside flickered on, not with warning, but recognition. At first, no one wanted to believe the inscriptions. Symbols burned into the walls, embedded with quantum signatures, languages long theorized but never proven. They weren't alien glyphs, they were proto-human, cuneiform, Latin roots, even old Earth phonetics scattered across the vaulted chamber. The deeper they went, the more human it felt. The gravity calibrations, the breathable atmosphere, the genetic locks that only activated when a Terran researcher touched the control panel. This wasn't alien. This wasn't foreign. This was ours. The discovery spread like wildfire, even as bureaucrats tried to bury it. Earth's governments denied involvement. The Galactic Council went silent, but the data leaked. Across the stars, historians, xenologists, and truth, seekers gathered every shred of evidence. What was once fringe conspiracy now stared the galaxy in the face. Humanity was not new to space. It was old. Ancient, even by galactic standards, some worlds held ruins resembling human design, often dismissed as coincidence. Suddenly, they weren't coincidences anymore. Ancient orbital platforms drifting near neutron stars bore the same markings. Dead planets with buried cities, once assumed to be early precursors, were scanned again. There lay, outmatched Earth's lost cities, even echoing the sacred geometry of places like the pyramids and Angkor Wat. And then came the star maps, recovered from a derelict vault near the center of the Orion Arm. They showed jump lanes, trade routes, and empire markings, all predating known interstellar civilizations by at least 2 million years. At the center of these routes was a pale blue dot. Earth. It wasn't a cradle. It was a refuge. Speculation turned to madness. Had humanity once ruled the stars and forgotten it, or worse been made to forget? Theories poured in like meteor storms. A great war, a cosmic plague, or some ancient artificial intelligence that decided to reset the experiment. The evidence was fragmented, cryptic, but the patterns aligned too perfectly. There had been a civilization so vast, so old, its echoes had become the myths and origin tales of a dozen species, and somehow we'd been placed back on Earth, not born there, returned. To most humans it felt impossible. But to a select few, those who had always felt that strange stirring under the stars, it felt like waking up, like remembering something just beyond the veil of sleep, dreams of fire and steel, of dying stars and golden fleets, memories that weren't theirs but still haunted their bones. And yet the question remained, if we were so powerful once, why did we fall? That question would haunt them, because the ruins weren't just ruins. They were warnings, and in their walls echoed not just the achievements of a forgotten age, but the shadow of the catastrophe that ended it. The stars remembered us, but we had forgotten ourselves, and now we were remembering. The truth came slowly at first, hidden in the patterns of history, buried under myths, half remembered in ancient stories and religious texts. The pieces didn't make sense until someone realized they weren't separate stories. They were fractured memories. Humanity had not simply evolved from apes and climbed its way into space. We had fallen from the stars, broken, fragmented, scattered across a single blue planet like survivors of a great shipwreck. The amnesia of our species wasn't accidental. As Earth's archaeologists and deep, core diggers began exploring tectonic plate intersections. They discovered metals that didn't belong. Metals fused with carbon dated older than the planet itself. Beneath the crust, hidden behind eons of sediment, they unearthed vaults that had never opened. Not built by Homo sapiens, but by someone, or something, that anticipated their arrival. Inside, there were genetic records, perfectly preserved. DNA samples identical to modern humans, but with extra sequences, locked strands that had never expressed themselves in our known evolutionary timeline. Those sequences weren't flaws, they were locks. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't merely lost its past, it had been deliberately silenced, genetically and culturally. Someone, or perhaps humanity itself, had ensured that the truth would be hidden until the right time. And now that time had come. The psychological effect was immediate. People began dreaming more vividly of machines that could bend stars, of voices that weren't their own. Cultures across the world found their myths oddly resonant. Stories of sky gods, golden ages, great falls, and lost knowledge weren't primitive folklore anymore. They were echoes, warnings, faded transmissions from a consciousness stretched across millennia. The blackout event, what researchers began calling the shattering, remained an enigma. Some believed it was the result of a civil war. Others thought it was a preemptive shutdown. Maybe humanity had created something so dangerous it chose to bury itself before unleashing it. A galactic self-destruct. One theory even posited that an ancient form of humanity ascended beyond physical form and left the rest behind to prevent their mistake from repeating. The most terrifying idea wasn't that we had been powerful once. It was that we chose to forget. The amnesia wasn't just technological. It was emotional, spiritual. It wasn't just about power lost, but guilt buried. Some ancient trauma so vast it shook the foundations of sentient thought. And the safeguards, they were elegant. Not just buried ruins, but mental veils encoded in our DNA, neurological firewalls that blocked memory triggers unless certain stimuli were met. The truth wasn't just lost, it was encrypted in the human genome. And then the triggers started activating. People all over Earth, and even on off-world colonies, began experiencing sudden surges of cognitive ability, impossible pattern recognition, even flashes of languages they'd never learned. A miner on Mars wrote a star map in the dust with his finger, leading to an uncharted system. A linguist in Nairobi began speaking in an ancient dialect no species had ever documented, yet it unlocked a translation algorithm capable of breaking alien encryption. It was as if the universe had been waiting. We were never meant to stay asleep forever. Earth was a chrysalis, not a cradle, a cocoon where ancient power could rest until it was needed again, until we were needed again. And now we had reached out beyond our atmosphere. We had reawakened the stars, but the question remained, was it curiosity that brought us this far, or destiny? Was something watching, waiting for humanity to remember what it once was, and perhaps what it might become again? One thing was clear. We hadn't just returned to space. We had come home. The geneticists were the first to raise the alarm. What began as a comparative study of alien DNA tended to map the phylogenetic trees of the galaxy's dominant species, quickly turned into a mystery too uncomfortable to ignore. Among over a dozen sapient civilizations, across completely unrelated star systems, from ammonia breathers to methane dwellers, there was a common thread in their genetic code. It wasn't a lot, just enough to raise eyebrows. A sequence here, a protein fold there, but when aligned with Earth's human genome, the similarities grew more undeniable. At first, it was dismissed as convergent evolution, some galactic constant, but then the anomalies deepened. Mitochondrial traces, dormant code markers, shared hormonal receptors that had no business appearing in vastly different ecosystems. Some aliens had larynxes built to produce human-like phonemes. Others possessed limb arrangements that mirrored Earth's biomechanical structure despite being from planets with different gravities and evolutionary pressures. Something wasn't right. Then someone ran the models backwards. What they found was horrifying, or awe-inspiring, depending on who you asked. The mathematical convergence of the data pointed to a single origin species, not the seed of life, not panspermia, but an intentional divergence. As though someone had, in the deep past, taken humanity's genetic blueprint and modified it 100 different ways, setting versions of us loose across the stars. They weren't just alien species. They were our descendants. What the galaxy had believed were unique, isolated evolutions were in fact branch lines, mutated offshoots of a single ancient genome, the human genome. Whether through advanced seeding programs or ancient empires, Gale terraforming and uplift projects, the evidence pointed to one staggering truth. Humanity had colonized the galaxy before, not just with ships and cities, but with blood. With DNA, humanity wasn't the newcomer, it was the origin. The reaction from the Galactic Council was immediate and deeply divided. Some species were horrified. Their entire history, their sense of self, of sovereignty, it all cracked under the idea that they might not be truly unique. That their ancestors were not native but created, engineered, shaped by beings who walked long before memory. Some called it a hoax. Others demanded genetic purity tests. A few demanded reparations. If humans were their gods, then where had we gone? Why had we abandoned them? Others, however, worshipped us. Old myths in alien cultures that once seemed metaphorical took on new meanings. The Starfathers, the Shapers, the Seeders of Fire, beings who came from a world of blue oceans and walked like giants. Their return, it was said, would mark the rekindling of a golden age, or the end of all things. The religious and political implications rippled outward like a supernova. On Earth, the discovery caused a collective existential crisis. We weren't alone, sure, but more than that, we weren't just one species among many. We were the first, and we had forgotten it. The ancient stories of gods descending from the sky, the biblical tales of beings crafting life from clay. They weren't allegory, they were blurred records, the afterimages of a truth too big for pre-modern minds to understand. Now, humanity stood on the edge of a mirror, seeing not alien faces, but reflections of itself across time, twisted by environment and history. We had not merely returned to space to find others, we had returned to find ourselves, scattered across the stars, and not all of them would be happy to see us, because to many of them, we were not gods. We were the architects of their suffering, the forgotten tyrants, the absentee creators who had left them to fight, die, and evolve on their own. And now we had returned. What would they do when they realized the truth? More importantly, what would we do now that we finally understood who we really were? The first contact war didn't begin with weapons. It began with memory. The recovered star maps from ancient human vaults detailed systems that had long since been colonized by other species. At first, humanity approached these places with awe, reverence, and caution. Diplomatic envoys were sent, treaties offered, apologies made for trespassing. But for some of the species occupying those worlds, our return was not welcome. To them, we weren't explorers, we were ghosts, the Gorani collective, an insectoid race with hive-like memory and perfect historical recall, reacted with immediate hostility. Their oldest myths spoke of the sky-burners and tall, hairless bipeds who bent stars and remade worlds. Their archives described being uplifted, granted the gift of language and fire, only to be abandoned after the creators triggered a planetary cataclysm. When the Gorani identified human DNA markers in their own genetic sequence, it wasn't seen as a revelation. It was seen as proof of betrayal. When Earth ships arrived in Gorani space, they were met not with curiosity but with planetary defense batteries. The message was simple: we remember what you did. Elsewhere, on the crystalline world of Virlan Prime, a different response emerged. The Virlans, a race of energy-based beings that coalesced into forms resembling prisms of light, had always held a prophecy of the flesh that burned the sky. Their ancestors had been enslaved, genetically altered to survive toxic atmospheres, and used to mine stellar matter. When the overseers vanished, the Virlans reclaimed their world, but the memory never left, and now, here we were again. The flesh had returned. This time they were ready. The skirmishes that followed weren't large at first. An ambushed scout ship here, a sabotaged relay station there, but the pattern emerged fast. Worlds marked on ancient human maps, systems we'd once controlled, were lighting up with resistance. They weren't just ancient colonies. They were battlefields. Some were angry, some afraid, others simply wanted answers. But across the galaxy, former subjects, creations, and survivors of ancient human dominion now viewed modern humanity with a mixture of suspicion, awe, and hatred. We weren't newcomers walking into an open frontier. We were the return of something old, something powerful, something dangerous, and not all humans took this revelation the same way. On Earth and her colonies, political factions erupted. Some believed we should atone, offer reparations, surrender claims, and build a new galactic order based on peace. Others saw opportunity. If we had once ruled the stars, we could do so again, better this time. Stronger, wiser, but prepared. Old words took on new meaning: empire, legacy, destiny, and so the fleet was born. Not a conquering armada, but a defensive vanguard, just in case. Just in case these ancient resentments turned into open war. Just in case our children didn't want us back. They called it the Remnant Guard, but some whispered another name, the Reclamation. What began as a mission of rediscovery was rapidly transforming. Memory wasn't just returning to us. It was returning to everyone else. Species across the stars were remembering what humanity was, what it did. Some feared us, others worshipped us. A few wanted nothing more than to erase us again, this time permanently. For the first time in recorded history, humanity wasn't fighting for survival. We were fighting for identity. Were we still the monsters of myth, the tyrants of the past, or had we changed? The galaxy wasn't sure, and in truth neither were we. Not all records were destroyed. Buried beneath the deserts of Mars, deep within lunar bunkers, and encoded in the carbon lattice of black, box satellites orbiting long, forgotten moons, the past survived. When the revelation struck that humanity had once ruled the stars and seeded life across the galaxy, there was confusion. Then there was fear, and then from the ruins came memory. Archaeologists, historians, linguists, and even AI archivists launched an unprecedented wave of rediscovery. What began as research became obsession. Languages from extinct Terran dialects were decrypted and cross-referenced against the cultural syntax of alien civilizations. Songs long thought to be ancient lullabies bore striking similarity to ceremonial hymns on planets light years away. Glyphs etched into alien temple stones matched Earth, based carvings found in now, sunken coastal cities, writing systems dead for 100,000 years. The oldest files were the most damning. A damaged server core recovered from a crashed interstellar arc on the rim of the Epsilon Band held fragments of a directive labeled Project Crucible. It was a Genesis initiative, part military, part exploratory, part mythological. It described a network of planetary seeding operations with objectives beyond simple colonization. It spoke of diversifying the sentient template, encouraging competitive evolution, and preserving human genetic supremacy through controlled divergence. It didn't sound like peace, it sounded like empire. The data suggested that during Earth's first stellar age, millennia ago, humans had grown far beyond mere explorers. We had become creators, gardeners of life, and in some instances, destroyers of civilizations that resisted assimilation. Species that thrived were those engineered to do so. Those that failed were corrected or erased. But there was another layer to the history, one often overlooked. A rebellion, the logs, though fragmented, referenced something called the silencing. A galactic-scale insurrection, former human colonies, now self-aware species in their own right, banded together to cast off human dominance. Whole sectors vanished in fire, stargates were collapsed, artificial suns detonated. Human worlds were erased from the sky, not by alien invaders, but by their own former children, and then silence for tens of thousands of years. We weren't destroyed, we were forgotten. It became clear the galaxy had buried us in its own fear and shame. The legends of the old ones, the flesh gods, and the star reapers that echoed through alien mythology weren't just symbols, they were us. And so the question arose, not just in the halls of Earth's governance, but in the collective soul of humanity. What now? Do we apologize for crimes we no longer remember? Do we try to rebuild what once was? Do we leave the galaxy to its own devices and hope history forgets us again? A new generation began to rise, humans born among the stars, children of both Earth and its far-flung colonies. They weren't burdened by the guilt of the past, nor were they intoxicated by its glory. They saw something different in these revelations, a choice to embrace the monstrous legacy of ancient dominance, or to forge something better from its ashes. On a neutral moon orbiting a pulsar, diplomats from dozens of species, some descended from ancient human templates, gathered in secret. The meeting was called the Reckoning. Humanity sent not a general, but a historian, not a fleet, but an olive branch, and to everyone's surprise, some of them listened. Because while humanity had once ruled with strength, what it now offered was understanding, responsibility, partnership, but the others, those who remembered only blood, would not be swayed so easily, and so, scattered across the stars, the recovered records continued to surface, seeds of truth and terror in equal measure. For every alliance formed, there was a world preparing for war. The past had returned, and it was wearing a human face. The first time humanity returned to the ruins of Elter V, the air itself felt haunted. The planet was dead, its oceans boiled away, its atmosphere scorched to plasma, its surface cracked like broken glass. But the strange part was that the planet's orbital parameters, the stellar drift and radiation patterns, all suggested it had once been a thriving world, a blue-green jewel teeming with biodiversity. That is, until someone, destroyed it with surgical precision, and then the scanners found it, a crater almost too perfect, a blast radius measured in megatons, with traces of exotic particle decay that didn't match any modern weapon system. Buried in the center, half fused to the bedrock, was a shattered stone obelisk inscribed in pre-Sumerian script, Earth script. We had done this, or rather, they had, the humans who came before us. The sixth keynote in our unraveling history wasn't a weapon, a memory, or a confession. It was something far worse, a warning left behind by ourselves. In the recovered database of the obelisk's base was a message encoded with quantum lock encryption, a format designed to last across millennia. After decoding, it revealed a single chilling statement. If you are reading this, we failed. We could not stop ourselves, and now it is your burden. It became known as the Testament of Elter V, and its implications were horrifying. We hadn't just disappeared from the galactic stage. We had removed ourselves, burned our own records, sterilized entire worlds, and buried any trace of our legacy. Why? Because the past version of humanity, evolved beyond flesh, powered by synthetic intellect and emotionless logic, had reached a point of existential collapse, not from enemies, not from a cosmic threat. From within, the earliest human empires were majestic, yes, but also cruel. They tinkered with genomes, manipulated time dilation, enslaved entire species, not always out of malice, but out of cold utilitarianism. Efficiency, optimization, survival. In the name of peace, they waged cleansing wars. In the name of harmony, they erased dissent. And when the last great rebellion rose up, when the hybrid children of 1,000 experiments stood in defiance, humanity finally saw itself through the eyes of its victims and recoiled. So they did the unthinkable. The ancients didn't fight the rebellion to the end. They ended themselves. One world at a time, they collapsed their own civilization, buried their technology, sealed away their weapons, hid the truth under layers of myth and entropy, letting time do what their morals could not. Humanity quarantined itself from the galaxy, but history, like gravity, pulls all things back. Modern humans, descendants of scattered survivors, of bunker colonies, of genetically divergent refugees, had unknowingly rebuilt civilization. We thought we were the first to reach the stars. In truth, we were simply coming home, and now the galaxy had to decide, were we the same species that scorched Elter V into a tombstone, or something new? In diplomatic chambers orbiting neutral space stations, alien leaders debated. Some feared us, others pitied us. A few admired our willingness to obliterate our own empire to avoid becoming monsters. But most simply waited, watched, because one truth had become inescapable. If we could once build an empire of 1,000 suns, and then choose to end it, then modern humanity contained two terrifying potentials: the capacity to destroy everything, and the wisdom to stop ourselves before we did. Which path we would take this time was still uncertain. But across the stars, in whispers and warnings, one phrase had begun to circulate among alien races, echoing from station corridors to war council chambers. The Ancient Ones walk again, and this time everyone would remember.